King of the Hill's 7th episode of their first revival season gave us another really great Bobby and Hank storyline, with the fun and subversive wrench thrown in the mix via Willow. On top of that, we got a pretty fun Peggy subplot with a little Dale action sprinkled on top, and it's historically quite funny when Peggy and Dale get up to hijinks. As usual, there's lots to talk about here, so let's dive into Season 14, Episode 7, Any Given Hill Day. And hey, if you like these breakdowns, make sure to subscribe, check out my other King of the Hill videos, and check out my uncut reaction videos to season 14 over on my Patreon. One of the craziest things about this season of King of the Hill is that Peggy has to go all the way to Dallas to get an MRI for her knee injury. That is a really far way to travel to get medical care. Maybe she could have found a closer provider if she had used today's video sponsor, ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free website where you can compare high-quality, in-network doctors, choose the best fit, and book them instantly. In-network appointments and more than 100,000 healthcare providers across basically every specialty. Mental health, dental health, eye care, skin care, and everything in between. So yeah, Peggy definitely could have found the right doctor for her knee injury. There are easy to use filters so you can see what doctors take your insurance, you can filter by location like Peggy should have done, and you can see who is the most highly rated by verified patients. And when you find the right doctor, you can immediately see their appointment availability so that you can book right away with the click of a button. ZocDoc appointments happen fast, usually within 24 to 72 hours of booking. There are even same-day appointments available. No need to talk to anyone, just find the right fit and book with a few clicks. Stop putting off doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/Johnny2Cellos or click the link in the description to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. I've mentioned while covering other episodes that sometimes the new season of King of the Hill can feel like two separate shows, since half of the time we're covering Hank and Peggy in Arlen, and the other half we're covering Bobby in Dallas. But they do make sure to have at least a few episodes where those halves cross over, and this is a solid example of that, putting Bobby in a little bit of an existential crisis about how much time he spends with his dad. The episode opens with a very funny and very dark joke where this patron of Robota Chain smells burnt toast, immediately cutting to his funeral afterwards. A stroke of bad luck, if you will. But this did serve two very strong purposes for the episode. One, I really liked the way it showcased the kind of person Willow is, willing to go to a random funeral with her new boyfriend. I also think this line goes a long way to help define her character.
I love the pageantry of funerals.
And the second purpose this funeral served was to send Bobby into that aforementioned existential crisis, realizing that the man who died is the same age and has a lot of commonalities with his own dad. This is definitely a great young adult dilemma for Bobby, the realization that your parents aren't going to be around forever, further escalated by the fact that not only were they across the world from each other for a few years, but now live in entirely different cities and don't see each other as often. I loved the way this pretty immediately highlighted the ways Bobby has actually become quite a bit like Hank.
But I won't have to say anything if I can show him I love him.
I mean, I guess there's a chance here that the idea is Bobby knows Hank would be uncomfortable by that kind of outward vocalization of affection, and he's adjusting his behavior for Hank. But regardless, it says a lot that Bobby is more focused on acts of service than words of affirmation. That is very Hank. I mean, the entire pilot episode is about Hank struggling to tell Bobby he loves him. So either this is an illustration of some of Bobby's Hank-like tendencies, or it's showing Bobby's understanding of Hank's tendencies. But I really appreciated the structure of this episode. It effectively paints two dilemmas for Bobby. One, trying to connect with Hank a little bit better, and two, the always stressful will my parents like my girlfriend concern. And to be fair, for the latter dilemma, Willow really misreads Hank and does not do herself any favors. But even before the dinner, Hank and Peggy aren't stoked about catering to a vegan. It's interesting to see where they split on this, because Peggy starts off pretty condescending towards the idea, but then later shifts a little bit towards being more accepting and accommodating.
It's important we respect her culture.
Weird isn't a culture. I don't have to respect weird.
And honestly, while I do quite like Willow, it's crazy how bad she is at reading the room at the Hill House. Calling him Hank and straight up airplaning some vegan lasagna into his mouth. Willow, girl.
You're welcome to call us Mr. and Mrs. Hill.
I think one of the issues I have with the episode is just how disparate Willow's understanding of situations at hand can be. Don't get me wrong, I actually really like Willow, and I like Willow and Bobby together, but one moment she's supporting him at a funeral, the next she's forcing force-feeding Hank vegan lasagna. One moment she's scored Hank and Bobby tickets to Cowboys fantasy camp. The next she reveals that she's also going to Cowboys fantasy camp with them. And I mean, the kissing Bobby over the table. Did I say read the room before? Sort of a nightmare first impression for Hank and Peggy. But I suppose that this is what makes the events at camp pretty satisfying. They really set this up as sort of the worst possible scenario. Hank and Bobby coming so close to finding a way to connect, only for Bobby's new girlfriend to sort of throw that big wrench in things. There are some moments I really love between Hank and Bobby thrown in here, before the wrench throwing of course. Hank's initial excitement for the fantasy camp is really sweet, but I particularly love this moment where he's talking to one of the other dads at the fantasy camp whose son plays football at Ole Miss.
I'm here with my son too. He's a chef.
These are small moments, but for Hank, this is super meaningful. Think about the original series and how often Hank would get excited anytime Bobby got anywhere near success that was related to sports. Like when he became the football mascot.
So you're not prancing around the garage at all, you're training.
Now, obviously, Bobby never really found success in anything sports related, but this dad just told Hank that his son plays Division I football in college, and Hank's response was to equally excitedly tell that dad that Bobby is a chef. Hank has such a genuine pride for Bobby's career that he's happy to mention it in the same breath as a Division I football player. I think they've come a really long way, but this episode actually turns out to be one of those classic Hank is won over by integrity King of the Hill stories. Briefly, at least. Even though both Hank and Bobby do pretty well and are among the best on their fantasy camp team, Willow, as it turns out, is incredibly athletic.
How did a vegan learn to do that?
I think this is a really strong formula for the episode because there are two major dilemmas, and the solution to one of those dilemmas comes at the cost of the solution to the other dilemma. Because of Hank's newfound connection with Willow despite their major differences, his connection point with Bobby over the fantasy camp diminishes.
Can we swap seats so I can talk strategy with Willow?
I think this episode also gives some really interesting insight into Willow as a character. We learn that her father drank himself to death after losing his job with the Cowboys, which makes even being at the fantasy camp difficult for her emotionally. And I think that says a lot about what she's willing to do to try and connect with Bobby and Hank. Though, obviously, eventually, the pain gets the better of her, but we'll get there. She obviously connects with Hank due to her history with the Cowboys and her athletic talent.
We're teammates now, so call me Hank.
Despite the place that this episode ultimately goes, for me, this moment of advice between Willow and Bobby is one of the sweetest moments of the season, and it leads to more of the best emotional moments of connection between Bobby and Hank. Willow really facilitates Bobby's arc in this episode. The beginning of the episode shows Bobby fearing the eventual loss of his father, and then shows him trying to find a way to show Hank he cares about him without saying it. But Willow, having actually lost her father, has the experience to know that sometimes you just have to say it.
Want my advice? Talk to Hank while he can still talk back.
And I really love how Hank and Bobby sort of ease into talking about the more important stuff. First, Hank just opens up to Bobby a bit about how dang sore he is, and how he feels he might be getting too old for this kind of thing. And Bobby relates to this by talking about how he feels after a day working at the restaurant. And the pair share this classic sports experience together, an ice bath. Feels like a very Hank Hill thing to want to share with his son. Okay, so the next thing though, might be the most conflicted I've felt about anything in the season. Don't get me wrong, it's pretty funny, and I think it does track with Willow as a character, at least as we've grown to understand her, but dropping a bomb on Jerry Jones' desk felt maybe a tiny bit more crude than I would have anticipated for King of the Hill. I'm trying to think of something comparable from the original series, and I don't think it extends too far beyond the tone of the show, but it did just stand out to me as something kinda crazy that I might not have expected before we went into the revival season. Funny animation though, Hank's eyes following the drop is nuts. I guess before we get to the nice emotional and narrative wrap-up of this one, maybe we should talk about the Peggy subplot. And they start by covering a very modern trend that has become increasingly normalized. Basically the idea that so many of us are just willingly participating in a full-on surveillance state, spurred on by Nancy's Ring camera showing a door-to-door surveyor of some kind.
I should post this and warn everyone.
Everyone has a camera on their front door. Everyone shares their suspicions about people in their neighborhood anonymously on an app. Nobody trusts each other, which I think is a pretty great inciting idea for Peggy to struggle with here.
You don't have a Ring camera, Peggy Hill?
No, we have a doorbell. that rings.
The de-evolution of your standard neighborhood community is kind of a perfect Hill family dilemma. Honestly, so much of the primary focus of the original show was on the community built in and around Rainy Street. The literal most iconic image of King of the Hill is the four guys hanging out in the alley drinking beer next to each other. So Peggy returning to Arlen to find that people order laundry detergent to their house instead of going to the drugstore, and that their neighbors are afraid to answer their door, is understandably upsetting. That is a massive, fundamental change in societal attitude. So I love that Peggy's bone to pick here is in favor of community, a real attempt to bring back that old school neighborly feeling that so much of King of the Hill exemplified, in a time where people are increasingly isolated and individualistic.
We did not evolve from caves to hide behind screens, Hank.
And I love that this comes in the form of this little community book nook, a more positive modern trend in terms of community building, but Peggy basically tries to build a common space for the neighborhood to enjoy something together, a reason for them to be face to face instead of viewing each other suspiciously through apps and cameras. And initially, it really works. I love the montage of the neighborhood coming through, checking out books, reading at the bench, setting up lemonade stands, Peggy peeking from the window to see it all going so well. It's really nice stuff. But the real fun of the episode is that Peggy's plan to bring people together also basically justifies those fears that caused people to act suspiciously towards each other, because it facilitates a bedbug infestation. Such a funny route to go with this one, for Peggy to make this big effort to undo what she feels is a societal regression, bringing people together only for that exact act to fully harm the community she's building. And obviously, this is a perfect storyline to bring Dale in on. For one, exterminator, duh. But two, Dale is the guy in the neighborhood who lives and breathes suspicion. And also Dale and Peggy are historically a wild pairing. Pretty sure it was Dale's influence that led to them nearly killing Randy Travis. But the funniest thing about this dilemma is that in order to prevent the blame being pushed onto Peggy for the bedbugs, she and Dale have to push blame onto a variety of other folks in the neighborhood.
I spray the rest of the houses that brought home your buggy books. I make money, you get off scot-free.
So the exact thing that Peggy was fighting against to begin with, suspicion and distrust towards your neighbors, which dismantles their sense of community, she is now pushing and facilitating through Dale, who starts various rumors about where the bedbugs came from to alleviate suspicion from Peggy. Very funny stuff. And despite the Peggy Hill hypocrisy, the final resolution is also that same brand of sweet peppered with irony. Peggy takes responsibility, and the entire neighborhood comes together by burning all of the books. Certainly not a coincidence that a storyline about surveillance state tendencies ends in a pile of burning books, especially with this little bit earlier in the episode where Bill was reading 1984. And Bill also maybe gets the sweetest piece of character development here, despite barely being a part of the episode. He tosses a book in the fire that turns out to be his wedding album disguised. It's really nice stuff. Nice to see Bill moving on in some way.
You definitely brought the neighborhood together.
Stop trying to make me feel better.
Okay, let's back it up to the other sweet resolution over at Cowboys Fantasy Camp. Obviously, the Jerry Jones office incident was a huge deal breaker for Hank. This is when Willow opens up about her father's drinking and death, and I like that despite what they witnessed, Bobby remains really sympathetic towards what Willow is going through. He's a good guy. But their subsequent abandonment of Fantasy Camp gives us another of my favorite Hank and Bobby scenes in the revival, and a real perfect culmination of Bobby's arc in this episode. A scene where he really opens up to Hank about something he's going through, and Hank receives it and gives advice. Despite this being spurred on because of Willow's behavior here, it is still the embodiment of Willow's advice to Bobby earlier in the episode. He talks to his dad while he still can. I think my only real issue with this is that basically Bobby's opening up to Hank sort of results in him unloading all of these little issues he had with Willow as a partner, which is absolutely all fine stuff to take issue with, but I think I just wish we had maybe gotten a little bit more time in the show to see these issues. Because outside of Willow's big Jerry Jones moment, which was motivated by years of pain and trauma, Willow was a pretty great girlfriend to Bobby. She was very supportive and patient and understood his needs, and I think I wish we had seen a bit more about how they were incompatible. And I do hope she sticks around in the show in some capacity in the future because she's a cool character. But ultimately, these concerns were always superseded by what Bobby tells Hank here, which is that he thinks he's still in love with Connie. I love the little detail that Bobby revealing this leads to Hank cracking a little smile here. Just great subtle Hank Hill character acting. And I think this exchange is one of the best Bobby Hank exchanges in the entire season.
I appreciate you, Dad.
Well, let's not get carried away.
Perfect slight deflection from Hank for the tiniest bit of affection. Pretty great. I do think that overall, this was another solid episode. It maybe had things like the Jerry Jones drop that I felt might be a tad crude for King of the Hill, but it still also worked well within the story itself. I also might have a few misgivings about the tightrope they tried to walk with Willow as a character. It's tough to make a character who both seems incredibly supportive and nurturing, but also incapable of reading the room sometimes. Ultimately, I feel like maybe just a little more time with Willow could have gone a long way, which of course is tough when we're only getting 10 episode seasons. They had to compartmentalize this little Willow arc into 2 episodes, and I'd expect if this had been your classic 22 episode season, she probably would have been around for 4 or 5 episodes before they split. But despite this, the story facilitated some tried and true King of the Hill formulas and gave us very funny moments. It's got a strong Peggy subplot that explores a modern dilemma without leaning too far into Flanderized territory for her, and one of those excellent Hank and Bobby moments of connection that the revival seemed to nail time and time again. It's definitely hard to be too upset about some of these perceived slight missteps when they have such a clear view of the bigger picture and have nailed the characterization. And that is all I've got for season 14, episode 7, Any Given Hill Day. Remember, if you liked this breakdown, I've got the first 6 of the season up already, more for season 14 on the way, uncut reactions to these episodes over on my Patreon, and of course, tons more King of the Hill videos across the channel. Check out all of that if you're interested, and stay tuned for more. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.